Greetings to all South Africans. Greetings to all Africans. I am King Echu, the radical Pan-African activist from Ambazonia, the 55th nation of the African Union. The African Union has no other choice but to accept the fact that Ambazonia is a free and independent nation. French Cameroon has no other choice but to accept that we, Ambazonians, are an independent nation. No longer, it doesn't matter how long they fight against the people of Ambazonia. Ambazonia will be liberated. Our discussion today has to do with South Africa and the president of EFF, the great Julius Malema, who I respect, but I disagree when he spoke against the anti-LGBTQ bill that has been passed or is going to be passed in Uganda after the people of Uganda have decided. Julius Malema, you're a great fighter, a champion for African unity. But the fact is this: speaking about this anti-LGBTQ bill in Uganda and speaking against the tyrant, as you call, which he is, I accept that, of Uganda, the president of Uganda, I don't think that it was right of you to speak against the anti-LGBTQ bill in Uganda. I don't think you can compare the anti-LGBTQ bill, or you can compare the LGBTQ agenda to black agenda, because you did some comparison saying that South Africans were, killed for being black, and the people of LGBTQ in Uganda and elsewhere else are being killed because they're LGBTQ. Those are two comparisons that I do not agree. Black people are hated across the world. LGBTQ agenda will not be accepted in the continent of Africa and in many African countries. As a matter of fact, there are over 30 countries that do not accept LGBTQ. And more anti-LGBTQ laws will be passed by other countries, because it is our given right to fight against agendas that do not have the interests of African people. You seem to forget that this LGBTQ madness is being pushed down, being shoveled in the people of Africa by Western powers. The same Western nations that colonize many African countries. Africa is still suffering from neocolonialism and colonization. We have not yet gone past from the problems of colonization. We're still suffering from colonization. And yet, Western powers have the authority, have the guts to bring the LGBTQ agenda. I gotta tell you this, Julius Malema. I see the LGBTQ agenda as a colonization agenda. Western powers are using LGBTQ to recolonize African people. And you pushing for LGBTQ in South Africa and the rest of Africa will not be tolerated. I don't care if you are a champion fighting for Africa. That is one thing we will not tolerate. As a matter of fact, anti-LGBTQ laws need to be passed in South Africa. But the reason it cannot be passed in South Africa, and the reason why you cannot champion that in South Africa, is because white minorities in South Africa control the economy and control the political power inside South Africa. For years, you've been fighting, and not much has been accomplished, because white minorities in South Africa control everything. They have over 70% of the land. The people who are fighting against the anti-LGBT laws in Uganda The South Africans who are fighting against the anti-LGBT laws that has been passed in Uganda cannot even come together and fight against what South Africans are going through. They cannot even fight against xenophobia in South Africa. How often do you hear of xenophobia in South Africa against black nationals? Where South Africans, black South Africans, get up and kill other Africans because they are taking their jobs and they're taking whatever. Meanwhile, the white minority who control the economy enjoy the wealth of South Africa. Yet you go and kill unfortunate black Africans because they're not from South Africa in the name of not having jobs. And why don't you have jobs? Because white minorities control your economic power. And you know that. And you know that the agenda of the LGBTQ was brought by Western power. It's been pushed by Western powers. So, in other words, you are also part of the Western powers agenda. That's what you are telling us, EFF. That's what you're telling us, Julius Malema. You are part of the Western agenda because you are pushing LGBTQ in Africa. So you're not different from Western powers who colonize Africa, because LGBTQ agenda is a colonization. It's colonization is an opportunity to colonize African people so that they can control African people. That's what it is. It's neocolonialism in a whole different form. And you are helping to push that agenda. I'll go further by saying this, Julius Malema. You are part of the Southern African Development Community, which is made up of 16 countries. The South African Development Community, made up of 16 countries. How many of those 16 countries have passed the laws of LGBTQ? How many of those 16 countries in Southern African Development Community have allowed LGBTQ to spread in those 16 countries? I'm quite sure there are many countries among those 16 countries in Southern Africa community that are against LGBTQ, that have passed laws that are against LGBTQ. How are you going to convince them to unpass those laws? Not to talk of doing that to 54 countries in the continent of Africa. You are trying to fight a useless, gigantic movement that does nothing to benefit the people of Africa. LGBTQ is a Western agenda. As a matter of fact, the conservative states, the Republican states in the United States have passed anti-LGBT laws in their own states, which means what? Even the Western nations are fighting against LGBTQ in the United States. Yet you want to push it. You want to use that to divide Africa even further. South Africa practices LGBTQ. Nobody has fought against that from the African countries. Why do you think it is okay for you to fight against anti-LGBTQ laws in other African countries? And why do you think that is tolerable? Why do you think that other African countries need to accept LGBTQs? Meanwhile, even in Western nations, the champions who are pushing the LGBTQ laws, they have their own people fighting against LGBTQ. Over 400 anti-LGBT laws have been passed in conservative states in the United States. And as a matter of fact, former President Trump has stated that when he's elected the next president, he will make sure that there are laws that only accept two genders from birth, male and female, two. So the United States herself are fighting against LGBTQ in the United States. They're fighting against it because they're against it. But for some reason, you have decided to pick the torch for LGBTQ to champion across Africa by fighting against Uganda's anti-LGBT laws. But I'll tell you this, just as you have failed in uniting South Africa, Just after you failed in uniting South Africa, you would not progress in this so-called agenda that you are speaking against Uganda. Uganda is in the East African community. Try to unite Southern African development and make sure that those nations have what? The agenda that they have, their main objectives that Southern African development community have decided to achieve through what? Economic development, peace, security, growth, elevate poverty, enhance the standard and qualities of the life of the people in Southern Africa. In their main objective, there's nothing about LGBTQs. How are you going to push that in the rest of 16 African countries in the Southern African community? How are you going to do that? Not to talk about pushing it in 54 African nations. Over 30 African countries are against LGBTQ. How are you going to fight that? How are you going to do that, Julius Malema? We need to see growth in South Africa. But you've been fighting and you've been doing a good job fighting, but nothing has been accomplished. The people, the blacks in South Africa still lack jobs. Electricity go on and off continuously. As a matter of fact, because of the electricity in South Africa, the the economy is going to go more backward. How are you going to change that? You have many other issues to fight, many other agendas to accomplish. For some reason, you've decided to make the anti-LGBT laws that is being passed inside inside Uganda, an agenda that is vital to you. But that agenda is not vital in Africa. And if you push that agenda, we will fight against you and that agenda. This is King Adrian, the radical Pan-African activist. I'll keep watch, and many other African countries and many other Africans will keep watch when it comes to this LGBTQ that has been forced down by Western powers that colonize us. We will not accept it. We will not tolerate it. LGBTQ is not part of our culture. It's not part of our ways. Those are Western ways, and they will not force down us. So they are not our gods. They are not our gods, and we will not accept it. It's as simple as that. And black South Africans need to stand up and fight against LGBTQ in South Africa, but they can't because they don't have the power to. This is that simple. This is King Edge.